Welcome back to HERstoryPod by the Herstory Project, our now super accessible, super visual, super audio podcast, wherever you are listening, because as of our last episode of Series 1, our Jane Austen episode, we are now not only on Spotify, but much to our producers' delight, and also, I'm sure, many of you, we are also on Amazon, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube, obviously. That's the one that's kind of taken the most effort from me, and yeah, that's the one I forgot when I was listing them. So we've done that really because we are intending to be a really accessible project, and Spotify is not the most accessible platform. So we are now, I hope, on the big ones. If there is any other platform you want us to be on, please let us know and I will do my best to get us on that. But bear in mind, it took me a full 12 months to sort out those 4. So I'm not saying it'll be quick, but it will happen eventually. Now, just a reminder of who we are and what the project is and why we are here, as it's the first episode of Series 2. We are the Herstory Project. Yay! We started in 2023 and we are a collaborative platform and initiative for women's, queer, decolonial and other underrepresented histories. We are aiming to provide platforms, spaces and communities for underrepresented historians and their histories. And like I said, we give a specific focus to women's histories, queer histories and decolonial histories. My name is Abby Woodman. I'm the founder and I specialise in 17th century queer history primarily, but I will really just look at any women at any point, especially if they're gay. And with me is Jillian Ducker, my amazing co-host and general right-hand woman on the project. She is also our editor-in-chief for the Herstory Project Journal, of which issue 3 will be coming out at some point this year when we finally get round to finishing our copy edits. And Jillian, could you maybe just very briefly introduce yourself again for our listeners?
Of course. I am Jillian. I've been with the project since 2023. Was I one of the first people to join? Potential.
I think you were the 4th person.
I just like to be reminded, That's a claim to fame I gotten in the early days. I say, what do I do beyond that? I studied early modern history, so particularly looking at women in queer cultural history and the intersections between that and political history. Very interested in soft power and how women used soft power in the political sphere. But beyond that, on the sort of very other end of the spectrum, in very modern terms, I'm really interested in queer history or queer theories, and particularly looking at queer cultural histories and queer cultural theories of music.
Fascinating. Genuinely, I've said it before, but the range of work that you look at confuses me every single time you tell me.
I can't be niched.
Yeah, it's very, very niche. So today's episode is the very first episode of Series 2. It's also the very first episode we're recording. And just another very first. It's also the very first of our brand new mini-series interview mini-series that we are running with authors, academics, PhD students, MA students, etc., etc. And this is really intended to help our incredible community of young and early career historians to get their work out there in new fun ways and introduce our listeners to some of the fantastic works that is out there. Now, our first port of call when we were looking for people to interview for this mini-series was, of course, our existing Herstory Proj alum, of which we have a really lovely group. So it's also the first time we're interviewing a Herstory Proj alum for the pod, which is also very, very exciting. And now I'm going to hand over to Jillian to introduce our guest for today.
I'm very excited to say that in today's episode, we are joined by Erin Fetterly, a PhD student at Birkbeck University of London. Erin's research spans British history from 1650 to 1900, with a focus on women's history, crime, medicine, science, manuscript writing, and knowledge. And in October 2024, she published her book, Women Who Kill, A History of Britain's Most Dangerous Women. We are going to try and cover as much of Erin's work and experiences as a PhD student and author in this episode, so if you've ever wondered what a PhD might look like or what the best way to kill your annoying husband might be, which is, what I am most interested in, this is the episode for you.
Erin, welcome to the show. My first question is actually for Jillian, which is, where are you planning on finding an annoying husband?
Anytime soon.
Is this anyone's annoying husband? Because you don't have one, as far as I'm aware.
I just like to have the knowledge locked away.
Okay. Erin, welcome. How are you?
Thank you so much for having me. I am so honored and excited to be on the podcast. I have loved being a part of the Herstory project for the past couple of years. I think it was 2024 that I joined. So yes, I am great. I'm busy working on my PhD. I've got a year and a half left, so it's crunch time. And just working away, reading lots of interesting history, researching lots of interesting women.
Amazing. Let's start at the beginning. A lot of our listeners love to know, firstly, what drew you to history, and particularly then like women's history and crime. A lot of our listeners as well are people who aren't historians. They are parents, friends, etc. So if you can try and explain it in simple, non-academic terms, that would be wonderful.
Absolutely. Well, like growing up as a child and a teenager, I wasn't like, oh, I want to be a historian or oh, I want to be an author. I've just always loved storytelling and books and reading, and I used to love to listen to. I'm going to age myself. Cassette tapes and CDs of historical stories, like King Arthur, or mostly about knights and princesses and stuff. So I used to love to lay in bed and listen to those while I fell asleep and different things like that. So I've always loved that type of thing, but it wasn't until like my final year of high school or the year before where I was like, oh, this is actually quite interesting. And I took a course about Elizabethan England, as well as I think it was a general European history. So it was kind of like the enlightened despots with Catherine the Great and all that stuff. And I was like, oh, this is actually quite interesting. And so when I got to university, I had 0% idea what I wanted to do. So for those of you out here who are going to university and have 0% idea what you want to do, that's okay. The first year of university, in my opinion, is to figure that out. Like, you don't have to have it going into university, even if you take more than the first year. That's what it's there for. You got to take these courses, find out what you're passionate about. And that's what I did. I took half science courses, half kind of history and drama. And that might be where my love for the history of science and medicine comes, because I was thinking about science. And I just fell in love with it. My first two courses I took on history, one was about European history and one was about history in Britain from 1066 to 1603. And I remember sitting in class going, oh my gosh, I could sit here for hours. And for one of the classes, it was 3 hours long, so I did. But I was just like, this is fascinating. I remember you guys will get this. After hearing, there was a YouTube song about the kings and queens at Harry, Henry, Stephen, or like all that William, Henry, Stephen, Henry, Richard, John. After hearing that, I went home and I YouTubed it and I watched it like 8 times because it just like grabbed me. I was like, oh my gosh, I can memorize every single one. And it was like a spark from there. And it actually took me another year and a half to declare history as my major, because I was still figuring out if I wanted to like make that my sole career kind of thing. But it was inevitable. I fell in love with it, and I was like, I only want to take history courses. I don't want to take any of these other courses. So yeah, and then I did my MA, and here I am 7 years after that, almost finished a PhD.
Amazing. Where did you do your undergrad and your MA? Just out of interest.
So my undergrad I did at the University of Guelph in Ontario, Canada. Amazing faculty, amazing programs. It especially has, I wasn't part of this, but one of my professors was. It has an amazing center for Scottish studies. I think it's Ontario's largest center for Scottish history studies. So that is a real nice accolade for the University of Guelph's history department. And then for my MA, I've always loved England, the UK, particularly London. And so I went there when I was 16 at first, and I did an exchange in my undergrad when I think it was my year 3. And I went to the University of East Anglia for 6 months, and I did some courses there. And so all of this just like kept piling on the immense passion and love I have for the UK, particularly London. And so when I finished my undergrad, I was like, I want to do my master's, and there is no chance in hell I am not doing it in the UK. So I was like, there's no chance. So I immediately started applying, and I found Birkbeck, which is a branch of the University of London. And I really liked Birkbeck because they hold their classes in the evening. So I had the day to, 1, explore London to my heart's content, which I did, and 2, do my schoolwork and do my archival work. And then I went to class in the evening, had an hour and a half class, and was home by 8 o'clock. And I'm like, this is amazing. And it's in the heart of London. It's in Bloomsbury. And I just found it the most wonderful school. So when time came to do my PhD, I said, there's no other place I want to do it but Birkbeck.
So I'm really interested then, sort of across your university experience, what started to draw you specifically to the history of crime and then women in crime in particular?
So definitely, women's history has always been a love, because women are just so underrepresented in many things. But one of the things is like history, like even until the past, I would say past 2 to 3 decades, it's kind of gotten a boost. But before that, it was so overlooked. And all these women's stories from history, all these women who aren't in the traditional archives, they're not in traditional records because they weren't allowed to participate in that kind of stuff. There's so many stories to uncover is basically what I'm trying to get to. And so when I was trying to figure out what I liked with history, I was drawn to so many different things. Crime and punishment was one of them. I took a course in my undergrad, and it was the history of crime and punishment, and it was just so interesting. They just went through, it's probably from medieval period to about 1800, and they kind of just did crime and punishment throughout, and I just found it fascinating. But that was only one of my interest areas. I also took 2 separate courses on medical history, the history of disease. That was fascinating. So I always moved more towards thematic interest rather than, say, political history or social history. So the only overlying theme is women's history, and then women's history in relation to crime and punishment, science and medicine, which I find a lot of the time fit nicely together. There's a lot of overlapping. And then knowledge, and that kind of goes with medicine and science. I love looking at women and knowledge, women in intellectual history, which is what my PhD is about, and just seeing how they thought and how their minds worked and what they were interested in and what they were capable of, because that was another thing that was so pushed to the side. Women aren't capable of the same things that men are, of course. But one thing I'm finding with my PhD research, and we're slowly showing the world, various historians, is that they were and are, and sometimes capable of bigger and better things. Yeah, I just kind of started gaining all these interests, and it was just really crime and punishment and the medicine knowledge thing that those two really hooked me. And just what I find, like when I'm reading an article, those are the ones that I'm not like, "Ugh, okay, got to do more reading." I always want to read those. And then yeah, women's history. I did my master's on Georgian medical handbooks, so that was my medicine aspect. But after my master's, I was kind of figuring out what to do, like my career direction, and I just started to read more and more and hear more and more about historians slowly starting to turn their attention towards women's history, and read more about these fascinating women, and just kept uncovering little stories here and there. And one historian that really inspired me was Susanna Lipscomb. She wrote an article called How We Can Uncover Women from History or something like that. And it was mind blowing as soon as I read it. And this was only maybe like 6 years ago, 5 years ago. But as soon as I read it, I was like, oh my gosh, that is what I want to do. I want to help uncover women's stories and bring these women's lives into the light, like to tell the world about these amazing women. And so that's kind of what I've dedicated my history career to since. So I've always been interested in women's history because women are amazing. But it wasn't until I read that I was like, this is what I'm dedicating my career to.
So that feels like a really nice segue to ask. Can you tell us a little bit about your PhD topic and what you're working on?
So my PhD topic focuses on Georgian women. I am fascinated with a whole bunch of different history, but my expertise area lies between 1650 and 1900. And I really like the period of like the long 18th century. Like that incorporates the Enlightenment, the Georgian period. I love the Victorian period too. So all of that, and then even the late 17th century, that kind of whole chunk. So my focus is on the Georgian period, specifically 1770 to 1830. So that's 50, 60 years. And I'm looking at how we can see women's intellectual engagement by looking at their private manuscript writing. So not the famous intellectuals at the time, like Mary Wollstonecraft and the Blue Stockings. I'm looking at women who simply wrote in their diaries, wrote in their journals, wrote some commonplace books, some recipe books. They may have been, like, I only look at elite women for my PhD because there's more manuscript sources for the elite women. But that doesn't mean to say that women below the elite level were not just as engaged. They just didn't have as much opportunity to showcase that. But I look at elite women and their manuscript writing and how we can see within their manuscript writing evidence of how intellectually engaged they were with what was going on around them. Their interests, just it's fascinating how much information is in their writing. And I toy with the idea through my PhD with conscious and unconscious additions to this. Like everything they wrote obviously was a conscious decision, but whether they knew, they were showing how smart they really were with what they were writing. Because some of it is just like, wow, like that's fascinating that she thought that way, or that she had an interest in this. Because even though during the Georgian period, women were starting to obtain more access to public spheres of intellectualism, especially throughout the Enlightenment, they were still greatly undervalued. They were still at the core level of society, believed to be for the home, believed to be mothers and wives first. The whole separate spheres thing, that's not a thing. That's getting debunked, and I'm with the historians that are debunking it. That wasn't a thing. But there is a fundamental societal agreement throughout history, millennia, that women are meant to be mothers and wives, and men are meant to be in the public sphere and work, basically. So I'm just adding to the scholarship out there that is slowly spreading the word and coming up with evidence that these women were just as interesting, just as intelligent, just as capable as any of the intellectual men out there that were changing society and changing the way we think in science and changing technology and all this stuff and interacting with the big thinkers of the day. There's women out there that were just as capable, and many did that as well. They just weren't acknowledged for it because, one, their manuscript writing wasn't published, which is usually when you would get acknowledgement, which is why I'm choosing to focus on manuscript writing, because a lot of scholarship has been written about these women who did publish, that people have been reading their stuff and going, oh, well, they were intellectual. Oh, well, but nobody's really taken a look at these women who were equally as intellectual. They just didn't publicly show their proof, basically, or publicly express their ideas. So I'm taking a look at that and showing how amazing and intellectual these women were.
Amazing. Before we move on to talking about your book, I want to just stay on your PhD for a little bit, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Firstly, I'll give you both questions now, and then you can kind of answer them how you like. Firstly, you mentioned the whole separate spheres thing and how that is being kind of debunked by historians at the moment. And I think it would be really useful for our listeners to kind of hear what that means and why it's being debunked. So if you could tell us a little bit about that, that would be amazing. And then the other question would be, were these manuscripts not published because there was a lack of interest? Did the women not want it? Was it just that there wasn't a means for them to be published? Because there were other published works by women at the time. So what stopped these pieces?
So first and foremost, separate spheres debate is a train of historical thought that was popular during mid-century. So like between the 1960s and 1980s, I would say, really gained its strength, and it hasn't really started to be questioned or debunked. Maybe like the 90s, they started to kind of question it and pick it apart a bit. And since then, there's a lot of different historians, including um, Amanda Vickery, who's one of my favorites. She did a lot of her work in the 90s. She has come against it. Another one, Amanda Flather, she writes about space, women, Georgian women in the space and them in the home and them in the public sphere. And she's come out with Amanda Vickery and said, yeah, no. But the separate spheres debate is basically the idea that, like I said, women were secluded to the home, and secluded being a word, like they were kind of pushed into the home. They were supposed to stay there. That was their duty. And men were in the public sphere. And there was a separation of private and public, women owning the private sphere, men owning the public sphere. And this kind of, historians debated back and forth that this had a kind of a rebirth in the 18th century, that women in the 16th century up until mid 17th had a lot more autonomy and were a lot more involved. And then in the later 17th and 18th century, it kind of had a resurgence, and women were thrown back into the home and delegated, and everything kind of became black and white separate. And that in itself created this group of women that turned into the, I don't know how you would describe it, turned into the 19th century women who were known to be lazy, and these were elite women that they're referring to. They were kind of the lazy, proper, just laid around all day, couldn't lift a finger, had to have servants everywhere. All they did was promenade, and this kind of figure that Victorian society pushed out, which again is false, because Victorian women were terribly saucy and interesting people. But it kind of made for this kind of lackluster, lazy Victorian woman. So the separate spheres debate again gained prominence, and it wasn't until about the 90s that people kind of said, yeah, but there's a lot of evidence of women working, and there's a lot of evidence of them being involved in this, and just more and more came out to kind of debunk it. And one of the big things that debunked it was the idea that private and public were two separate things, because the home in the Georgian period especially was a place of such interactive energy, and so many public events happened in the home, especially with the Enlightenment, with this new idea of knowledge, with all of these people starting these intellectual clubs, and there was the theater, and there were the new coffee houses. With that came the home as a center, especially for the political elite, a center for interaction and a center for mingling and gossiping, and sometimes even work, sometimes work as well. And so that in itself, the fact that the home was such a public place, debunked the entire thing, because that just stopped the whole home and public as separate things. So I know that was very long-winded. So
No, that's very good.
The separate spheres debate was a separation of women and men in private and public in the late 17th to the early 19th century. And it's being debunked because historians are seeing that women were not reclusive in the home, were not shunned away, and that the home and the public sector were very much intertwined and not black and white separate at all.
So because it's absolute bollocks is why it's being debunked, basically.
Yeah.
And why do you think that these kind of manuscript writings that you're working on, why weren't they published? Why weren't they kind of put out there? Was it for any particular reason?
So I am specifically focusing on ones that they were not. So not that they tried to be published and failed, just that they were never considered wanting to publish. It was literally I just don't even think it was in the realm of an idea for these women. It was just simply their private writing. It was this woman's diary. And I think the women who got their manuscripts published were the women who wanted to put out there their ideas, their intellectualism, their opinions. And the women I am looking at, they still had these opinions and they were still intellectual. They just didn't really have a desire to share it with the world. Instead, they shared it with their friends and their family, and sometimes just themselves. They just had these interests, and they were just living their lives. But that doesn't, I make the point, that doesn't mean they were any less intellectual or any less capable. They just weren't interested in the public sphere hearing all about what they had to say. And some of the women, though they interacted with the public sphere, especially because I'm working with elite women and elite political women as well, or some of them, they were involved in some of the Enlightenment, the great Enlightenment thinkers, some of their new discoveries, some of the new institutions, some of the political uprisings. They were all involved with that, but they just didn't assert their ideas on it to the public. They corresponded with their husbands or with their families about it and had strong opinions and had brilliant ideas. They just didn't feel that they wanted to let the public in and publish their writing. And also, it was very hard to get works published. So even though there was a lot of women who did, it was very difficult, partially because they weren't taken as seriously, and many women had to write under pen names just to get their work published. But it was a tricky thing. So even though there was, say, 36 women throughout the Enlightenment that published a whole bunch of books, maybe even a bit more, the percentage of women who actually could have published or had these ideas is like minimal. It's like maybe 1%.
Yeah,
Like,
absolutely.
so it was just, it wasn't their priority to publish their writing. They just wanted to
They were just
share it with
writing.
family and friends. They were just writing. They were just writing for themselves, for their family. They were just living their lives. But I'm trying to just really bring home the point with my research that even though these women were just trying to live their lives, doesn't mean that they were any less intellectually engaged or intellectually capable.
Amazing. So a couple of practical questions about your PhD, because I know people who might be thinking about it, or kind of staring down the barrel of a PhD, definitely not thinking about Jillian and myself, are always fascinated to hear how people's works. So I know your PhD is with Birkbeck, but you are currently in Ontario. So how does the
Yes.
kind of how does that work for you?
Well, when I started my PhD, I was in a position where I wasn't ready to pick up and move to the UK for 5 years, just like that. Even though now I kind of wish I was there, but all in good time. Yeah, so I was looking at schools that had distance education programs, and I was absolutely over the moon thrilled when I saw that Birkbeck did, because that was my first choice anyway. And so basically, I'm part-time distance education, which means I have 4 to 7 years to complete my PhD part-time. I am choosing to do it in 5. And I have a supervisory meeting with my 2 supervisors once every month to month and a half. For Birkbeck's policy, you have to do 3 meetings a semester, I believe. So I meet with them online, video chat, and then the rest is really up to me. I do my own research. If I have any questions, I can email my supervisors, but I just do my own research, do my own writing. And that's one of the things I like about a PhD, because I'm a very independent person. I've got nobody breathing down my neck with deadlines. I can just do what I need to do, set my own schedule. Like if I don't do any work one day, that's okay, because maybe one day I'll do like 7 hours of work instead of my 3 or 4. And it just kind of evens out. And then about twice a year, if I can scrounge the funds, I go to London, which is just the most amazing gift. And I work in the archives for 2, 3, 4 weeks. I meet with my supervisors. I look at the manuscripts in the archives. I travel around to different archives to do my primary source research. Because although there are many digital primary sources now available online, it's not the same as getting into an archive, for many different reasons. But sometimes you stumble upon things that you never would digitally while you're in the archive. And about 70% of what archives hold are not digitized. So that opens you up to so much more. But yeah, so I go about twice a year to do my work and my research, and the rest I just sit at home at my desk and type away.
With the snow out the window blocking you in,
With
apparently.
Yes. My 4 feet of snow.
Absolutely. Okay, amazing. Jillian, did you have any follow-up PhD questions? Otherwise, I will hand over to you to ask about the book.
I guess one sort of slightly bridge question, was it that flexibility during the PhD that allowed you to write this book as well? Because what a feat to do both at the same time.
I will preface by saying it was not easy. um, I got my book contract 2.5 months before my first year my PhD started. So I had already had my interview and paid my first deposit tuition for my PhD when I got this book offer. And I was like, well, there's no way I'm passing this up. I have to do this. But I was like, okay, the next 14 months are going to be interesting. But yes, the part-time did help because I was able to kind of balance. I took my focus from doing 100% of my time on my PhD, and I did about 50-50. Although I do have like a day job that I do to allow me to pay for my PhD. So I had to kind of balance all three. And my PhD definitely took a backseat the last 6 months before my book was due. And I feel a little bad about that, but I reasoned with myself that there was no way I was going to get my book finished if it didn't take a bit of a backseat. But as soon as I handed my book in, I just jumped right back on my PhD, and that was like 3 years ago now. So, but yeah, it was a balancing act for a time. When I went to the UK in January 2023, I spent 6 weeks there, and it was just back and forth between the British Library and the Wellcome, with like, okay, I'm going to look at these sources for my book and these for my PhD, and then I'm going to go home and I'm going to write this up for my PhD and this up for my book. And it was just trying to split my time as best I could and not go crazy in the process.
Sounds incredibly impressive.
Yes. Well,
Very impressive and very questionable choices there. I'm not going to lie to you.
Yeah.
Listen,
Yeah, it was basically just grasping at these opportunities that were given me, because before I started my PhD, this is another shout out to anybody who is kind of in the middle between degree and career. It took me like a year and a half to kind of figure out where I was going, what I was doing after my MA. And that's in that time I figured out I wanted to do a PhD, and I just kind of started building my portfolio with writing all these articles, first for the Historians magazine and then for the Herstory project. Just kind of building my portfolio, and it just kind of happened all at the same time. I was going to start my PhD, and then this offer came, and I was like, oh, but I was like, I can't not do it. Like that, this is be a slap in my own face if I turn down this, because this doesn't happen all the time. So I'm very glad I didn't.
Very impressive. In terms of the content of the book, also incredibly impressive because you trace such a large time frame in terms of looking at the sort of history of female killers in Britain. I'm curious, what sort of, because you've talked about how your focus is really the 17th to the 19th century, what sort of influenced you to broaden that time frame out?
Well, honestly, it was what my editor asked for. Because the book came about because in the Historians magazine, I wrote an article about 19th century female killers. It was just like a brief 1,000-word article. And I guess she read it. And sorry, hang on, pause. This is another plug. Those who want to like hopefully get noticed or start their career, write for the Herstory project, because who knows who reads those articles? Like, who knows what kind of
Also, the Historians magazine is an equally big shout out that we should give. I've written for them. I've also recorded a video with them that'll be coming out later this year, I believe, on their YouTube. So write for us, write for them. We're both free to submit to, and crazy things could happen. Like you could get a book deal.
Absolutely. You never know who's going to read them, because my commissioning editor read that and was like, hey, and then emailed me and said, we're looking for somebody to write a book on the history of female murderers. would you be interested? And I immediately thought it was spam.
Which I think is a very reasonable reaction.
Right? I was like, who is asking me to write a book? Like, come on. But yeah, I did my research and figured out, oh, this is a real person and a real publishing agency, which is Pen and Sword Books, by the way. So she asked me if I wanted to write about the history of female killers. And I said, okay, cool, but tell me more. And she said she wanted to really go into the women's stories and bring out what happened in their lives and what they were like that led them down this path. And I was like, brilliant, because I want to tell women's stories. Like that's perfect. And I asked her the timeline and she was like, oh, what do you think? And I was kind of toying with a bunch of different things, but if she wanted a history of female killers, I was like, well, maybe we should go maybe like 1500 or something. And we talked it over and decided that just throwing in a bit of medieval would be okay too. Just to kind of get that contrast, I guess. Yeah, I knew it was a big undertaking. I was like, oh, that's 700 years. But we both decided that it would be more of a interesting, fun overview rather than an in-depth case study on every single woman or on the criminal justice system at that time. So even though I tell these women's stories, it's like 7 or 8 pages where a lot of these women's stories could be like a third of a book.
Yeah.
So just in order to get kind of a more popular audience general telling of women in crime, just kind of did an overview so people could see what it was like here and what it was like here and what it was like here. And then 500 years later, what are the differences? And she definitely said she wanted it to appeal to a wider audience than just academics. So that was a challenge for me as well, because whilst writing my PhD, or starting to, I had to write for a popular audience. And so that was two different writing styles. And I think another thing that helped me balance both is, even though they're both about women's history and telling women's stories, my PhD topic and the book topic are different. So it kind of gave my brain a break from one to kind of go into the other. So that was helpful.
Absolutely. That is fascinating. I had no idea that that is how you got your book deal. I love the success story from the Historians magazine, and the fact that it really does happen. That is such kind of good to hear, because that's the whole point of these projects existing. So that is incredible. I want to ask a very specific question. So the subtitle of the book is A History of Britain's Most Dangerous Women. So basically, what do you mean by dangerous? Are we talking about how society viewed them or how they viewed themselves? Like, what does that mean in this context?
Definitely 100% society. Because the whole book kind of focuses on how these women were perceived and how they were treated. And this is all based on society's perception of women and what a woman should and shouldn't do, what a woman should and shouldn't be, or what a woman should and shouldn't feel. And that kind of boiled down into how they were, well, first, how they were responded to before they committed these crimes, because a lot of the women showed signs that nowadays would spike red flags with us and we would maybe get them help. But because women's health issues, for the most part, weren't taken too seriously, especially mental health issues. And even in this case, even men's mental health issues weren't taken very seriously. But the book focused on women. So mental health issues weren't really seen as a thing. And as we get into the 18th and 19th century, people started to acknowledge that there was something there. like, oh, something's wrong, but it was dismissed as like a female problem. It was hysteria. They were just too overwhelmed, too stressed. And it's like, no, they had postpartum depression. So all of these cases are about how society saw them as dangerous. That being said, some of the women in this book, I would say maybe about a half to a third, were like wicked women. Like they were some people, I don't know. But some of these women,
dangerous.
they were genuinely dangerous. And although there could be an argument for something in their past happening that caused some sort of mental shift, which is definitely possible, some were just, it's like, wow, okay. That there's one lady that, for the money, killed the lovely old woman who rented a room from her. And it's like that. Why? But then you have other instances where, especially when it came to infanticide, which is a very hard part of the book to write. But all of these women, they were until the 18th century, it started to change, but still wasn't fixed. They were seen as these evil, dangerous monsters because a woman's one role, their first and foremost role in their life, was to bear children and be a mother. And so the women who ended up killing their children, whether it was like child murder or infanticide, were seen as going against the natural order of things, going against societal norms, going against what a woman should be, should feel, should do. And because of that, were monstrous. And so when they were accused, they were treated very harshly because they were thought to go against what they should. They're like going against their ingrained habits. But when it came to women and society in general, like women who killed her husband or killed her apprentice, the husband, that was considered, you were killing somebody, a subordinate was killing somebody above them, which is where petty treason comes in. And that was very, very serious because you weren't supposed to kill somebody above you. A husband killing a wife, however, like, not very nice, sir, but definitely not treasonous, definitely not going against society. And that was the thing. Men were supposed to be hot-tempered, hot-headed. Even it goes back to like the four humors, like women or men were dry and hot. And so they were supposed to be prone to anger and prone to quick decisions. And so if they had a fight with somebody and killed them, oh, that wasn't very nice. But it was more expected, which shouldn't be the case. But it was like, oh, men are supposed to do that. Men are supposed to be angry. Whereas women who were technically cold and wet, they were led by their emotions, and they were supposed to be demure and pure and chaste and emotional. And so when they snapped and killed the person that had been abusing them, one, did they not only kill their husband, who they were supposed to be subordinate and subservient to, two, they were going against exactly what a woman should be, whether it be wife, mother, pure, chaste. That's not how a woman was supposed to act. So even though two people could commit the same crime, people would be like, oh, we expect that from a man. Whereas a woman is like, oh, that is not a womanly behavior. Therefore, we're going to treat her worse. And it wasn't until the late 18th century that people started to go, okay, let's be a little more, maybe she was under stress, maybe this, but it definitely didn't like change everything overnight.
It's so interesting to me because even today, sort of when you look at studies of, for example, women's political violence, you really still see women sort of pigeonholed into one of three stereotypes of the mother, the monster, of or the whore. So women are really committing these acts of violence out of motherly instinct because they've lost their mind for love, or because they truly are so monstrous that they completely inverted that idea of proper womanhood. It's really interesting to see how far back those ideas trace.
Absolutely.
I guess this leads me on, and you've sort of already touched on this, but just how differently was female violence treated to male violence in the criminal justice system in particular? So I guess not just in social values, but in the actual way sort of punishment was meted out.
So, up until the 18th century, late 17th century, but really 18th century, the charge and the punishment for killing your husband is petty treason, and that was to be burned. And unless a man committed treason against his government, like his king, or if like a male servant killed his master, men weren't subjected to that punishment. That was like 85% of female punishment was burning at the stake. And we see this in witchcraft as well. But that was one of the big differences. Because again, a woman killing her husband was seen as one of the worst crimes because it was going against the natural order of things. It was uprooting society. It was changing the way things should be done. So that was treated harshly. And then after this, women were hanged. That was the typical. And then for men too, for men who killed, they were usually hanged. The medieval period, we won't get into that because that has a whole nother bunch of executions, beheadings, and they did a lot of hanging too. But beheadings were rarely used on women, Marie Antoinette aside. Let's say in English context, women who killed weren't really beheaded; they were burned. So overall, how women were treated differently, that was a big difference. They, again, up until late 18th century, the general consensus is that they were treated more harshly. But if you break it down by crimes they committed, the variables change. So like committing petty theft, or committing some sort of fraud, or something not as serious as murder, women more often than not were treated a little more lenient because they were seen as the softer, the more demure of the sexes. They were treated a little more leniency. But because murder was such an anti-woman thing that would really disrupt society, that was just totally 180 from how a woman was supposed to be, they were seen as anomalies. They were seen as dangerous. They were seen as non-women, like a woman would not do this, is not supposed to do this. So because of that extreme difference in characteristics, female killers were treated more harshly. So if you break it down by crime, it is kind of up and down, up and down. But when it comes to murder, definitely treated more harshly, hands down. And if you look overall throughout history, which this is going to come to no surprise to anyone who studies women's history, overall, not necessarily in punishment cases, but overall, they were definitely not treated equal. Like there was no equality. Women were definitely the lower end of the societal scale. Yes.
I think we will really touch on similar points that you've just made in next week's episode. We're doing the history of contraception.
Oh,
Um,
yes.
so I think we're going to touch on a lot of things because we are also going to talk about infanticide and abortion in those. Obviously, infanticide and abortion, very difficult topics, and infanticide, not a method of contraception, but it is part of the history of contraception. And I think the idea of women killing, but especially when women kill a child, um, is really difficult for even us as historians to kind of fully grasp and fully get to grasp with, because we are still massively shaped by this very gendered idea of what a woman is and what a woman should be. So I think everything you've just said is very pertinent also. And we're going to touch on it a lot again next week.
Yeah. Yeah. And a really big thing with the infanticide aspect is how 95% of at least the cases I looked at, which was a lot, um, um, they could have been helped, and a lot of times could have been prevented if they just had, if they, one, acknowledged what they were going through, but with that comes having the knowledge of these mental struggles that um, pregnant women and mothers go through. That's a huge hormonal process, and uh, all the stuff that happens. Like society, doctors, anybody, physicians had no idea. But at that same time, they had no idea, but they didn't really try to have an idea. At least not until later, not until the 18th century. Like women weren't taken as seriously as they should have been.
Hold on. What year is it?
Right? Which is why it's pertinent.
It's why it's moving on to a slightly lighter topic. Can you
Okay.
give us a quick way, your favorite way maybe, that someone murdered an annoying husband? Because we did promise that at the start of the episode.
Okay. I want to preface this by saying none of the women that I talk about get away with it. So I don't want to be part of any sort of court case. I also don't want to give advice because these women were all executed, except for some of the infanticidal women later on when they were treated a little better and they were just institutionalized instead.
Because that's better.
Because that's better.
Like,
But there were still some very interesting women. Of course, I had to mention one instance in my book. It's a very brief instance because there wasn't a lot of information on it, maybe because of what happened, but where a woman and her husband are fighting and she ends up cutting off his member. So that's fun. Another one, there's an instance in here where she throws him out the window.
the strength on that woman.
Right? Maybe it was a push. Maybe it was a push. It's hard to know exactly.
I'm going to go with throw in my brain.
Like,
that's how I'm going to imagine it.
I like thrown.
Yeah. And then one of my favorite cases, which is not a happy case because really she should not have been executed. And if she lived today, she would have been so different off. But her name is Mary Aubrey, and she was around in the 1600s. And she was a French midwife. And she, for I think it was 3 years, was abused every day by her husband. She was almost close to death many times. And so after 3 years on and off of being abused like crazy, she snapped and she ended up strangling him because at one point he was abused and probably sexually abusing her. And, but he was also like really, really drunk. And so he ended up passing out and she just snapped and ended up strangling him. An interesting point is that as soon as she was finished strangling him, she kind of came out of her anger trance and tried to revive him, even though this man had abused her for 3 years. And she couldn't. So what she ended up doing was chopping him up and putting his pieces all over London. Um, she dropped part of it. Yeah, part of his pieces in like a privy.
I remember reading this, and I think just after I read it, Lucy Worsley's Lady Killers did an episode of their podcast about it as well. And I was like, huh, this sounds weirdly familiar.
Yeah, and this is great because up until like maybe like 10 years ago, there wasn't a lot of information on her. I didn't find a lot of information on her. Most of what I read was from broadsides and clippings from that time. I know that Maddie Pelling, who I love, she wrote about Mary in her first book. And yeah, Lucy did a little bit on her show about Mary. But she's kind of coming into light, and just how unfairly she was treated and how it's so frustrating, but also how she just took the most delicious revenge.
I think Mary's story is fascinating because her way of disposal, beautiful. But her story itself is so tragic. And I really, like you say, love that she is getting a little bit more attention. Obviously, maybe you wish kind of she didn't have to have any attention, but I think it's good that we know her name now.
Yes.
Question. We've one more sensible question. So I'm curious, and I know we've touched on this a bit, but how do you think the sort of historical debate around women in crime translates to how we talk about women in crime and women's violence today?
That's a good question. I will admit that for the past like 2 years, I haven't done as much scholarly work on women in crime because I've been focusing on my PhD. So all the scholarly work I did is from 4 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago. But I think in a general sense, the way that women's history and basically almost like a respect for women's lives in the past has really had a resurgence in the past, let's say 30 years. I think that in itself is creating new insight and new opportunities to share these stories, which in turn is shedding more light and bringing more context and maybe inspiration to the issues we're having today. And it's kind of shedding light on how unfairly women were treated in the past. We kind of already knew that, but like getting these examples and having these different historians come up with all this evidence and sharing these new stories, like bow down to Hallie Rubenhold's book, The Five. Like that is what I want to do. I want to write like that and about those type of things. But having like that work on those women and taking a story that's so well known that historians have been talking about for like centuries and flipping it on its head and talking about the women and talking about what these women went through and how these women were treated and how these women were thought about. I think that just helps today thinking about women's place in society and how even after, what's it now, like almost 150 years, 140 years, we're still lacking equality in so many fundamental areas. Like you think that, oh, like the women in Jack the Ripper's time were treated. Yes, we have so many more rights now, but there's still a fundamental gap between how women deserve to be treated, how it's just like rational equality, and how so many women are not. And I consider myself incredibly fortunate because I live in Canada, which is a relatively equal society. But I look at people in the Middle East or people in some Asian countries or some African countries. And even I'll just mention the United States right now. There are so many women who um, they're not being treated like equals. Their intellectual abilities are being sidelined. Their capacity for having medical autonomy is being put aside. And I think if we look at women in the history of crime and how historians are newly looking at women and crime and pulling out all these stories and women's strength and then women's unfortunate treatment, it can help to bolster the idea that we still need to smarten up a bit today, and also contribute to the idea that women are badass and they are smart. And like if we were capable of standing up against this and that and doing all this stuff before, we're capable of being whatever we want to be now. And that's one of the things I also stress, kind of coming parallel with my PhD, is if women were this intelligent back then, they were capable of all this, they were able to interact and engage with all of these intellectual, amazing things happening throughout the Enlightenment, that hopefully will inspire women today to stand up for what they believe in, share their intellectual thoughts and feelings, do what they think is right, share their interests and their abilities, and hopefully that will help women's situation overall. And one last point, going back to women in my book, one thing I stress throughout my book is that women in society, like we said, are thought to be calm and demure and polite and chaste and motherly and all of these things. And basically, the evidence that I found in my book is that women can be wickedly, wickedly wonderful and wickedly awful, and they should not be underestimated.
Amazing. That is a very beautiful place to leave our serious conversation. That is really, really fascinating. I would love to have you back, I think, when maybe in like a year and a half's time, when you've finished your thesis, and we can have a really in-depth chat about some of the women that you're working on right now. I think that would be fascinating. I yeah, I feel like I've been intellectualed out. I don't know if Jillian has anything intelligent that she can say right now.
Didn't have much intelligent thought being generated going into a record.
That makes sense. Okay. Our amazing researcher, Bex, has suggested that we finish off our heavy episodes like these with some silly, fun questions. So I have chosen 3 silly, fun questions. We're going to start off with the least silly, fun one. What is the best piece of advice you would give to someone considering a PhD in history? Other than don't do it, because that's mostly what I hear.
I would say, if you're considering doing a PhD, you have to love what you're doing it in. You have to be passionate about it. You have to love working on it for hours and hours and hours. You have to love spending years without too much of a payoff. All this delayed gratification for this, yes, beneficial and wonderfully worth it end point, but it takes a while to get there and it takes a lot of work. And so obviously everybody's human. You're going to get sick and tired of it, like on and off at some point, but ultimately you have to love it. You have to love what you're doing. I love history. I love women's history and 17th, 18th, 19th century history. I find it fascinating. And so don't do it unless you love it. If you're like, yeah, that's cool, that's interesting, I'll give that a try. It's because it's too much money, too much effort, and you won't get through it if you don't love what you're doing.
I think that is a really sound piece of advice, and I think it is what every professor has told me in chats about PhD is do it if you love it, but you better love it.
You better love it. Absolutely.
I think that is a great piece of advice. So, a slightly more fun question.
Mm-hmm.
What book do you have on your bedside table right now?
Okay. Well, I am currently right smack dab in the middle. I just finished one and I'm about to start another. So the one I just finished is I usually stick to historical fiction or historical nonfiction. But occasionally I will dive into more of a mystery or thriller, hence my book. But especially if there's like historical mystery thriller kind of. But this time I just thought I'd take a dive somewhere else because it was very popular amongst the reviews. And one of my best friends is a very influential book reviewer and she loved it. So I read Verity by Colleen Hoover. And it's just being, I think, changed into a movie this year. So that'll be interesting. But it was an emotional roller coaster. It had me going, what the is going on here? So that was definitely like, I read the last 30 pages in, oh, actually, no, I read the last 3 chapters in about 2 hours. Like I was just go. Like it's like, I really should be doing research right now, but I can't, I need to figure out what the heck is going on with these crazy people. So that was interesting. A very interesting thriller for people who don't want like blood and guts and intense like serial killing murder. If you want a lighter thriller, still very interesting. And the one I'm just about to start is an oldie, but a goodie. I haven't read it yet. I'm a little behind, but it's one of the glorious books by Ruth Goodman. And it's How to Be a Victorian. So I am looking forward to starting that maybe tonight. But I right in between both of those right now.
And finally, I'm going to let you pick from your book or your PhD, but if you had to have dinner with one woman you've researched from either book or PhD, who would it be?
Oh my goodness. I think right now, by the time I'm done my PhD, this might be different.
We'll ask
But
you
right
again
now,
next year.
okay, perfect. Right now, I'm going to pick Mary Palmerston, who my first PhD chapter is all about. She is the mother of the Prime Minister, Lord Henry Palmerston. And she is so fascinating. You can read all about her in the first chapter of my PhD in about 2 years.
You can also read about her in the article you wrote for our website,
Yes,
which was a lovely plug
absolutely.
that I didn't even ask you to do.
Absolutely. I wrote an article for the Herstory project all about Mary's influence on her son, the Prime Minister. So you can read that. But she was fascinating. She left behind probably over 100 letters. Let me see, 2 diaries, a commonplace book, and a pocketbook. And they are just filled with all of her various interests, some of her controversial comments on the poor people of Italy. Nobody's perfect. But she was fascinating. She was so smart. She was friends with one of the most influential intellectual men of Georgian Britain. And she is credited by another very influential Enlightenment British man by introducing said intellectual into British society. So she did it, not her husband. She introduced this man into British society, and he was one of the founders of the Royal Institution. And she was a patroness of the Royal Institution. She started, I think, at least 3, if not more, industry schools for girls, which aren't exactly the same as like what we would think as a school. It was more like preparing them for life as working women, either like in rich households or doing some sort of labor, but still giving these women, these girls, opportunities, feeding them. Um, she so she was very involved in philanthropy. She was involved in the Royal Institution. She helped her friend, Count Rumford, who was the founder of the Royal Institution. He was the one who kind of reinvented and renovated Georgian kitchens to make them more efficient in cooking. And so she had some of his latest inventions installed in her kitchens and installed in elite kitchens all around England. And this was her. And she, okay, my favorite fact about her, and this is from one of her letters she wrote to her brother. So at the time, she had no idea what was going on. She just wrote this in her letter. And with hindsight, we can go, whoa. She and her husband were 2 of the last, probably not the last, but within the last week, 2 of the last people to visit, like, commonly with King Louis and Marie Antoinette before they were taken into custody and eventually beheaded.
No way.
Yes. Like, they were visiting them while the French Revolution was kind of getting up to snuff in 1793, and they were going into the belly of the beast, one could say, which was not smart because they brought their kids. Like, who brings their kids to a site of a revolution? But and they're like, oh, we're going to visit the king and queen. And they went in, and she's writing all this in a letter to her brother. They're like, oh, I was very excited to meet her. She was very nice, but you could tell they were stressed because lots of stuff was happening and they were storming the castle or the palace. And so she writes about that, but they had no idea what was going to happen. She does speculate. She goes, oh, we were talking and we think they are probably going to end up like taking them into custody and putting them into seclusion while all this goes on. But she had no idea how it was going to end up. And so she's writing all this and she's like, oh, I met the Dauphin and I met the Queen and they were all very nice. And then, like, I think it was 1 week later was when the palace was stormed and they were taken into custody. And then if you follow her letters while they're on trips throughout Europe, she like writes in her letter to her brother, like, oh, we heard about what happened to King Louis today. How horrible. And I'm like, oh my gosh. Like, so like, it's brilliant to have her insight. And it's just, mwah.
That is crazy.
Yes.
I have no other word to describe that. That is, yeah, wow, just wow.
I was elated when I read that.
I very much look forward to reading that first chapter. I think it must be absolutely fascinating. Okay, amazing. We'll all be glad to know, reached the end. Thank you, Erin, so much for joining us for this interview for the first episode of series 2. It has been genuinely one of our most fascinating episodes. I think Jillian will agree with me. It's been an absolute delight to talk to you. If listeners want to learn more about you and your work, where can they find you?
Well, first and foremost, I do most of my history interaction and career updates through my Instagram, which is at the Canadian Londoner. You can message me on there or see fun little history tidbits or see updates about my book or my PhD. You can get my book, Women Who Kill, A History of Britain's Most Dangerous Women, on any major bookstore online, like Barnes & Noble's, Waterstones, Indigo for Canadian people, Amazon. I don't know if I said that. Yeah, I think on my Instagram there is an email link if you wanted to email me as well, which is where I do a lot of my professional correspondence.
Beautiful. And in the show notes, we will also link to Erin's Instagram and her articles on our website and the Historians magazine. So you can go and read that first article that got her a book deal. Because that's what people really want. Okay, let's wrap us up. Thank you so much for listening once again. Whatever platform you are listening on, be it YouTube, they've all gone out of my brain. Amazon, Spotify, Apple. The one that took me 3 months to sort out. Yes, Apple Podcasts. It would be insanely helpful to us as both a podcast and the project overall if you are able to like, review and share. It's free, it's really great. I mean, please review us with like 5 stars, don't review 1 star, that would be mean. On whatever platform you're listening on, it just helps us grow, reach more people and keep doing these calls late at night. And we will be back next week with the next episode of series 2, which, as I mentioned earlier, is going to be the history of contraception. So this episode was actually researched by one of last year's cohort of our student researchers, Leela. And we will also be running, this is a little mini announcement, we'll be running the student research program again this summer. So we'll be posting about that very soon. If you are an A-level or undergrad student, or you know an A-level or undergrad student who might want to get a little bit of experience researching, we have completely overhauled the program for this year. So you will now be working with our lead podcast researcher. And it's basically just intended for you to get experience, and you will eventually contribute a whole episode that we will record and publish. So I think it's a really great opportunity, and next week will be the first one of those that we are going to be putting out. So that is really exciting. And then we have lots more fun episodes planned for this series, including more interviews with more PhD researchers, other academics, and most excitingly, people who have written for the project. So please subscribe, etc., etc., and we will be back in your ears with more delightful herstories next week. And I've been Abby.
I've been Jillian.
Thank you so much for listening.